I know the thumbnail is going to make some people mad, but tell me not to stir the pot, I'll begin stirring the cauldron. In all seriousness, I know some people are going to hate watch this video essay. That's fine. But some people are going to watch with genuine curiosity as to what I have to say. So let me quickly clear some things up. I'm not here to say superhero fatigue isn't real. I'm not here to say you don't have valid reasons for experiencing superhero fatigue. I'm not here to say if you didn't enjoy Phase 4 and what we have of Phase 5 overall that you're wrong. I'm not here to say the criticisms of Phase 4 and 5 are all wrong. What this video is for is to go through some criticisms of Phase 4 and 5, then move on to discussing individual projects, starting with WandaVision and ending with the Marvels. In each project, I'll say the criticisms I agreed with and why, what I would have liked to have seen differently, and what criticisms I do not agree with and why. I'm doing it this way for a few different reasons. Number 1, there is way too many videos of this nature on the platform just trashing Marvel, recycling 1 or 2 year old criticisms, and using words like woke as buzzwords. In Instagram posts for Marvel content, it's hard to share the hype for projects when the top comments are people being overly negative, calling things flops that haven't been released yet, calling for the cancellation of unreleased projects, using buzzwords, and commenting clown or cry-laugh emojis under comments of positive sentiments towards Marvel, or accusing the positive commenters of being bots paid off by Disney. Obviously, there's no way to monitor this unnecessary amount of negativity, but bottom line to what I'm saying, Marvel's social media presence is filled with a lot of toxicity. Despite that there are people out there having fairly valid criticisms, they're getting drowned out by the buzzword-using trolls. As a result, I've become fatigued by Marvel complaints overall. This video essay is my way of dealing with the frustration of witnessing the Marvel hate bandwagon/dogpile without starting comment fights or shifting the blame on any particular person. Because, of the negative Marvel video essays, some of them have titles and text in thumbnails with dramatic lines like, Marvel is dying, yet the videos themselves will have pretty valid criticisms, because YouTube's algorithm is difficult and sometimes you gotta borderline clickbait. It's unfortunate, but I get it. I don't want it to seem like I'm pushing blame for the overall negativity onto those people. I'm hoping this video can actually serve to put some positivity back into the Marvel community, because there are lines of dialogue and scenes that have been criticized, with the criticism coming from specific interpretations, whereas I had different interpretations for those. Therefore, in sharing my interpretation may help others to view it differently. I also want to create some positivity by not just saying, I didn't like this part, but rather, in this scene, it would have been really cool to see this, and maybe they can still set up a scene like this by doing this. So strap in, because this is going to be a journey. So as I said, this video is covering Phase 4 and 5, because the vast majority of complaints are of the nature that Endgame was, quote, truly the end. So let me start off with saying I'm not going to address a lot of the issues with CGI, because Marvel has had a CGI problem prior to Phase 4. There are YouTube videos out there discussing the Marvel CGI issue that predates Avengers Endgame. I do acknowledge the extra content put out in Marvel's Disney Plus era has made the special effects artists really spread themselves thin, and some of the special effects issues got a bit more obvious. Even then, Disney has a problem with that overall, it's not just Marvel. Something a lot of people have talked about is superhero fatigue, which doesn't encapsulate just Marvel since DC is apparently in a weird place too. Now, I think getting tired of superhero stuff is valid. I don't share that experience, but I get it. I would also like to point out some things. Marvel recently started this thing called Spotlight. All Marvel Spotlight projects will be projects that you can hop into without having seen any previous projects. For example, the Echo series being released soon is a Spotlight project. Although Echo did appear in Hawkeye, the scenes of hers in Hawkeye are not necessary to have seen to watch this show. So the people worried about getting caught up to watch things can relax when it comes to Marvel Spotlight projects. This is a step in the right direction. I think Marvel should also add Spotlight labels to all previous Disney Plus projects that don't require catching up on things, so people with superhero fatigue can have some place to start with in Phase 4, but I'm sure there's also somewhere online with the list of those projects to inform you. When it comes to non-Spotlight projects, though, I don't think you actually need to watch all the previous stuff to enjoy them. The first few Marvel movies I ever watched were Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, and Infinity War. I watched Infinity War not understanding most of the references, but I enjoyed most of the humor and moments despite that because the characters and interactions were so fun. When I got caught up and went back to watch it, it felt even better understanding stuff I didn't before because I was part of the club now. Fun fact, the first episode of Doctor Who I ever saw was the 50th anniversary special 10 years ago. Right before it aired, I took out the iPad mini I was using at the time and looked up the synopsis for the show on Wikipedia, got the gist of it, and enjoyed the special. I've been hooked on the show ever since. I don't believe you need to actually catch up to enjoy stuff. In the age of the internet now, if there's stuff you skipped, you can simply look up the synopsis online or watch one of those YouTube recap videos. I'm not saying you have to watch Marvel's new stuff if the projects aren't of interest. I am saying, if you do want to, you don't have to get caught up or catch up by watching previous stuff in full. I just think a huge percentage of people saying the interconnectivity makes it overwhelming to keep up perhaps aren't considering the use of reading synopsis and watching recaps. Nando V Movies has pointed out in some of his videos that the MCU is more like the comics now, where you keep up with the characters you like the most and projects related to those characters, and I'm inclined to agree. I also want to point out I'm not a comic reader, so some of the criticisms stemming from comic knowledge I won't be able to answer as well. Something I've been seeing way too much of is people saying Phase 4 and 5 disappointed them while in the same sentence admitting they didn't watch most of it. I'm not trying to be hard on the general audience, so in the nicest way I can put it, I'm seeing too much of people seeing bad reviews on things they would have otherwise watched and not watching, which in and of itself isn't the problem. The problem is a lot of people calling projects bad or calling Phase 4 and 5 bad because of the opinions and reviews of others despite not having seen most of the projects themselves. I'm not saying you should watch everything Marvel puts out if you don't want to. I'm not saying you should watch a film you don't want to watch. What I am saying is, regardless of whether you wanted to or not, calling the project bad because of what you've heard from others when you did not see said project is letting others form your opinion for you instead of forming it yourself, and also is not truthful. You did not watch something, so you don't actually know if you would consider it bad. All I mean by this is we should be seeing less of people stating, I didn't watch most of Phase 4 and 5 because people said it's bad, so it must be bad, and more of people saying, these are the projects I did watch. I liked this and didn't like this, and these are the projects I didn't check out, therefore, I don't have an opinion on them because trailers and reviews aren't enough to truly know what my watching experience would be. There are some reaction channels on YouTube who ended up skipping a bunch of projects, which I looked forward to watching them see, just because of bad reviews. While I understand if something is rated lower, creating a reaction to it on YouTube may mean the video doing less well, which is a problem if YouTube is your full or part-time job. I get it on some level, but still feel disappointed by it. I will, however, take the opportunity to shout out some reaction channels that haven't skipped anything. Sincerely KSO, I love her commentary and how much she radiates kind, caring energy. And Struggle Nation. They're really funny, and once in a What If reaction, one of them referred to Ultron as a Microsoft-ass bitch. So, thank you for that. Although I want to look at more constructive criticisms of Phase 4 and 5, here's a little tidbit for the hate watchers. Forced diversity is not a thing. Different types of people exist and have more representation in the media than they did before. There are plenty of times when characters are unnecessary or details are given to characters that feel shoehorned in. But this happens both in and outside of diverse characters and actors. A gay character being written in a way where the character felt unnecessary isn't forced diversity. It's simply a case where said character could have been written better. Speaking of, feeling like the social awareness aspects in projects could have been done better is one thing. Calling it woke is another. Woke is an activism term created by the Black community. It means alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. This term began being appropriated in online slang and even by some US politicians in the last handful of years. Let me be clear, someone appropriating the term woke to describe things they happen to not like does warrant criticism. However, that criticism often isn't worth the time because people using words with other meanings as buzz terms for the most part don't exhibit accountability. This is why in a lot of comment sections when they call things woke and others reply by saying define woke, the original commenter will 9 times out of 10 either not answer at all or answer by giving a definition that is incorrect. So I could go through the complaints that crowd has, such as too much girl power, etc., but the complaints from that crowd have shaky foundations at best, so it would not be worth the time to answer every single complaint from them, but I will talk a bit on some of it later. Another criticism is the Disney Plus shows having anticlimactic final episodes. Now, I didn't find this the case with a lot of the shows. However, I don't think the criticism is invalid. At the same time, I do personally believe in something where some scenes don't work and or tone problems are present. That doesn't have to ruin a project entirely. I'll dive more into that while discussing some particular projects. I don't completely disagree with a lot of the complaints stemmed from stuff affected by COVID, whilst at the same time I don't find it entirely fair since Marvel couldn't account for how the pandemic would affect filming. Now, with that general stuff out of the way, let's dive into project number 1, WandaVision. Okay, first things first. I have 2 fictional parental figures, or fiction moms, if you would. Wanda is one of them. So I am biased, and anytime I am biased towards one of these projects, I will tell you because I like having transparency on my YouTube channel. Having been said, we don't do Wanda slander in this metaphorical house. And although I do think there were things that could have been done better with her character in the project she showed up in after this one, we'll get to that. WandaVision overall has criticisms that kinda miss the mark for me, but I can see where they're coming from. For one thing, I wholeheartedly agree with the complaints over the Ralph Boner thing. Because why? What even was that? Now, let's expand our minds for a moment and imagine if they might be setting something up. Because I don't think this has been established about the multiverse yet, but could be, that both alternate universe versions of the same people exist, and different people with the same face across universes exist, aka doppelgangers. Because we've seen 3 Peter Parkers with different faces and multiple Doctor Stranges all with the same face. In the upcoming Agatha show, whichever name it ends up having, they're calling it the Darkhold Diaries right now. To be honest, House of Harkness was a great show name, and you shouldn't mess with greatness. In her show, though, Agatha could reveal she chose Ralph because the Darkhold allowed her to see into the multiverse the way Wanda could see in it, despite that she couldn't travel in it other than dreamwalking. And Agatha knew Ralph was, although not Wanda's brother, a physical doppelganger to a version of her brother from a different universe, and so he was the closest thing she could use. Maybe I'm reaching, but who knows? Some of the complaints were along the lines of the show being slow in the first few episodes, while others leaning towards that the finale felt too similar to the third act of most Marvel movies with fighting, laser beams, etc. When it comes to the beginning of the show, it's important to remember they're recreating eras in television when the format of sitcoms ruled. Speaking as a certified vintage lady, TM, they did phenomenal in this. Everything from recreating practical effects used back in the day on shows like Bewitched, to using vintage cameras to film the episodes that correspond with the decades they were recreating. The thing is, the first few episodes of WandaVision have the same approximate run times and tone of older sitcoms, which modern audiences aren't accustomed to. Unless you're like me and you watch that stuff a lot. If slower-paced retro stuff is not your taste, that's fine. But that's not a fair criticism of WandaVision specifically, because you'd have to extend that sentiment to all the sitcoms that it was emulating perfectly. With regards to the final, I think there's something to be said for how it's structured. For one thing, we get a battle between 2 witches and get to see Wanda's powers, how they were lacking before she knew she was a witch, particularly taking a lesson from Agatha about the runes. When it comes to the Vision versus Vision fight, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time Marvel has shown us 2 characters with the exact same abilities and the exact same amount of strength, and what that looks like in a battle. Apart from that, we also get to see Vision being very himself by segueing the fight into a philosophical discussion and solving it that way. When it comes to Wanda's character in WandaVision, a lot of people labeled her as the villain of the show. My bias aside, there are a few points not considered when people make the claim. When it comes to Agatha, because she is actively under the Darkhold's influence during the whole show, and we haven't seen her when she's normal, calling her a villain isn't something I can do at this time. And also, just to add, I don't actually know for sure if the flashback of her and her coven takes place before or after she found the Darkhold, so that remains to be seen, I guess. Honestly, if any person has to be the villain, I guess it would be Hayward, but that's the next thing I want to say. The villain doesn't always have to be a person. WandaVision deals with the subject of grief, depression, denial, and what it does to a person. If you pay attention, when Wanda is creating the Hex, by the look on her face, she's in a lot of physical pain. Her powers are acting subconsciously on her behalf. She has reached her breaking point and can't contain her pain. Her pain mixed with the untapped potential of her powers made her unsaid desires manifest, aka the sitcom dream life with Vision alive as her husband and having children together. Because denial was a huge part of how she was coping, Wanda was too deep to be able to undo what she did towards the beginning. She wasn't choosing to hurt anyone, she wasn't aware she was hurting anyone, and even when she was told the first couple of times, the denial got in her way of processing what she was being informed of. As soon as Wanda had dealt with her grief and denial enough to see things for what they were, she began taking down the Hex, because Wanda has always wanted to do what's right. During one of the scenes when Hayward was trying to villainize her, it's pointed out to him that Wanda going along with Hydra's experiments was because she was led to believe S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers were dangerous for reasons that were pretty convincing to her and her lived experience. Once she realized that she was wrong in Age of Ultron, she switched sides. Even though in Civil War she was arguably on the right side, she still apologized to Vision after the airport fight. Wanda has consistently shown when she realizes she's done something wrong, she acknowledges it and adjusts accordingly. Something I took a bit of issue with in the show was the off-screen death of Maria Rambeau. It was strange to me that she was a huge part of Carol's story in Captain Marvel, and on top of that, we're told in this show she founded S.W.O.R.D., yet died off screen and that's it. Peggy founded S.H.I.E.L.D. and got a lot more screen time and even her own spin-off show that is no longer canon to the MCU, but I digress. Since we've gotten 2 variants of Maria since then, the character has had a bit more time to shine. So, I guess we'll see where that goes. When it comes to Monica, I've seen a ridiculous amount of criticism for her line in the show towards Wanda when she says, "They'll never know what you gave up for them." Like, I genuinely don't understand the hang-up on this. Number 1, earlier in the show, Monica establishes Wanda's kids are not someone else's kids under a false persona. They're hers. Created by magic, yes, but still hers. Wanda didn't have kids before the Hex, so she was giving them up so everyone else in the Hex could be free. There is the argument that she could just recreate them, but here's the thing. There's no guarantee that if she tried that, they would have their memories and be the same kids she raised in the Hex, considering Hex Vision didn't have real Vision's memories. Monica was there when the twins were born. She literally helped Wanda give birth. She's like the unofficial godmother. In the finale, Monica jumped in front of bullets to protect Billy and Tommy. Her powers were so new at that point she couldn't have known they would save her. She was willing to die to save those kids. She formed an emotional attachment and probably saw her own mom in Wanda. Seeing Wanda return without Vision or the kids most likely made Monica think about how her own mother must have felt before passing while she was gone during the blip. So yes, because the people of Westview were scared of Wanda and her ridiculous amount of power, Monica had a different perspective and knew Wanda's pain on a deeper level. What she says to Wanda, with all the context we're shown, makes perfect sense. Another thing people love to say about the finale is that Wanda didn't take responsibility because she left while law enforcement were arriving. Let's unpack this. Number 1, Wanda already, at the beginning of the show, didn't understand the scope of her powers. Then she has Agatha telling her there's a whole chapter about her in the Darkhold. Wanda did not know the Darkhold corrupts the user, so she didn't know reading it would lead to her own corruption. Another bit of dialogue people had problems with was Wanda's response to the line from Monica I just talked about, wherein she says it won't change how they see me and goes on to say, "I don't understand this power, but I will." These lines are a reference to Civil War when she tells Vision, "I can't control their fear, only my own." The point of what she's saying is that losing her kids won't make these people fear her less, but at least she can not be afraid of herself and her own powers by learning more. That was the goal of taking the Darkhold, so she could understand her abilities to stop something like Westview from happening again, without knowing what the Darkhold would do to her. In that moment, Wanda had just gotten a huge power boost from Agatha, and with everything that happened in the show thus far, Wanda knew she was dangerous. When she leaves while law enforcement are arriving, she's not avoiding responsibility. She's taking responsibility by leaving so she isn't a danger to anyone. Having people around her, even people who are armed, isn't a smart move when she has so much to learn about herself, especially after receiving that power boost. Leaving and going far away to live in seclusion while she learns was the right move. It was the safest move. This show and Wanda came into my life at a time when I really needed her. I never thought I'd see representation that is so specific and personal to me, such as a practicing witch who deals with her trauma through the escapism of old sitcoms. I was in a dark place, and while I'm still not in the best place, I'm better off than before. At the time, there were some people I'm close to that I lost contact with during a time where they were in danger and began to think the worst. I've been in a physical place where I'm surrounded by people who've contributed to trauma, and I've spent years feeling resentment, wondering if the damage I've sustained has affected my ability to care for others. Till I heard this show tell me, what is grief, if not love persevering? During a time when I was speculating two people I love might be gone, and realized the amount of preemptive grief I was dealing with spoke to how much love I'm capable of feeling. WandaVision made an impact on me that will last as long as I last. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So there's actually not too many criticisms for this show, apart from a lot of people saying it's boring, and I don't know how to answer that. My guess as to why this might be is because it's smack dab in the middle of WandaVision and Loki, which are both highly stylized with vibrant color palettes for sets and costume. Falcon and the Winter Soldier has darker tones and a bit of a grittier feel to it, but by no means does that equal boring. Watching Sam and Bucky's dynamic grow is endearing. Bucky's therapist being unhelpful is a very real-life display that not all therapists are a great fit, and Bucky receiving advice from Sam, who is both a friend and a guy licensed for counseling, and finding his advice was better is a good show of sometimes needing to look elsewhere for guidance. Some people took issue with Sam being the one Steve chose to take over the role as Cap and not Bucky. Although that decision wasn't made in this project, a lot of that discourse carried through to it. I think in context you need to remember the trauma Bucky has been through and that he's in no way at a place in life where he should take on a role like Captain America. The show continues giving us insight to Bucky's healing journey that hammers home this point. When it comes to Walker, yeah, he does come off a little bit villain of the week, but to be fair, he does kill that one man with the shield, not just out of a show of power and egotism. He's also mourning for his best friend that he just lost. In the finale, when he sees people in the truck about to die, he drops his makeshift shield and goes to help. So the complaints about him being an evil blonde white dude to make Sam look better doesn't exactly sit right when given that we're shown he does have some redeeming moments. When it comes to Carly, I get that some people found her turn to extremism a bit blunt, but the show is only 6 episodes, and unfortunately this happens a lot in real life. Governments pushing people fighting for equal rights too far by having their peaceful attempts at survival ignored too many times till forced to non-peaceful measures, wherein the powers that be can say, look, they were bad the entire time. Carly's life and death serves as a tragedy that Sam brings to the forefront. That's why his speech really hit the mark for me. I know there were complaints about his rant at the politicians being too simplified, but if he were to discuss things the way someone trying to tell people in power to smarten up would have to discuss them in real life, we'd be here all day. Sam's speech hits all the marks it's supposed to, that you can push against citizens calling for equal treatment and human rights, and villainize them when their methods changed after you are unmoved by peaceful approaches, but so long as you keep doing that, the next person will always rise up. When Sam mentions, quote, the next Carly, he's directly telling them there's no actual way to run from the consequences of their actions. I get that do better is oversimplified, but the point is, both in fiction and in real life, people in positions of government that are meant to create more safety and quality of life for the average person shouldn't have to be told by those same persons to do better. When it comes to Sam's decision to take on the mantle as Cap despite Isaiah's words, I think it serves as a perfect example of respecting members of your community while also not letting them make your decisions for you. Sam heard what he had to say and did consider it, but still did what he felt was right. Isaiah didn't completely change his mind on the matter, but respected Sam's decision after hearing his speech and hearing Sam's reasoning the second time he visits to tell Isaiah about his museum monument. One thing that bothered me a little was the title card changing from Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America and the Winter Soldier, because Bucky worked so hard to not be the Winter Soldier anymore. It felt a little disrespectful to his character development. In my opinion, the title change should have read Captain America and Sergeant Barnes. Now on to Loki. So Loki is one of the most popular Phase 4 projects, and barely any mainstream criticisms were made from what I saw except for a few things. The whole self-cessed thing with Sylvie and Loki didn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, did the same people suggesting two variants of the same character falling for each other is incest notice that there was an alligator Loki? Variants of the same character don't necessarily have to have the same DNA. Loki becoming a quote-unquote good guy overnight instead of longer development like original MCU Loki does make sense when he got the shock of a lifetime seeing the Tesseract, his ticket to power, not work in the TVA. Plus, his whole life including events he hadn't experienced yet being played out to him, including his death, which told him how his quest for power would have ended had he continued on with it. The MCU claims are mostly from the forced diversity crowd I mentioned earlier, but I will point out that Sylvie is better at fighting the TVA because she studied and learned how to take them down her entire life since childhood, and has had to have good survival skills growing up in apocalypses. Her being a better Loki than Loki isn't a gender thing, it's a circumstance thing. An argument can also be made that she's not more skilled than him after the events of the newly released Season 2. Criticisms about the Season 1 finale being anticlimactic are a bit harsh, considering it was affected by COVID, both because Loki had to be split into 2 seasons, so the finale of Season 1 was never supposed to be a finale episode, and the actual filming for the episode was affected by COVID. Black Widow. A huge criticism of Black Widow is that the movie should have been made and released years before instead of being a prequel like it was. While that's fair, I think for what it is, it's great. I understand the amount of plot armor moments where Nat should have got hurt but doesn't can take you out of it. While that's fair, I think it's important to remember Nat's a trained assassin and spy who's learned a lot of physical skills, probably including how to land safely when you fall off a structure. In real life, there are people who don't injure easily and heal super easy. It wouldn't be out of the question for Nat to have those qualities, considering what Melina reveals about her being chosen from a program that determined the genetic potential in infants. The other widows most likely were chosen for these reasons as well. When it comes to Taskmaster, as I said, I don't read the comics. I am aware, though, that in the comics he's a specific character and not featured in Black Widow, but the Taskmaster suit is. I don't think the MCU is obligated to make everything they adapt comic accurate, but from what I understand, there can still be an MCU origin for a more comic accurate Taskmaster by having the suit get into the hands of Tony Masters, considering what they showed us with the mimic capabilities being a feature of the suit, not a skill Antonia has alone. When it comes to Dreykov, I understand what people mean when they say he's not very intimidating as a villain, but the point is, he's supposed to come off as a pathetic guy with a lot of power. Nat points it out herself, it's easier for him to look strong in front of defenseless little girls. Taking narrative power away from him helps put the real-life parallels of human traffickers into perspective that, while being terrifying monsters to the people they hurt, at the end of the day, they are pathetic. Some people felt Nat wasn't really the main character with how much screen time went to Yelena, but for one thing, the movie is very much framed as a passing the torch story, and for another, the movie is called Black Widow. They are both Black Widow assassins trying to free the rest of the Black Widow assassins. What if? What if Season 1 is sentimental to me? I watched a few of the episodes shortly after my first viewing with someone special that I, not on my own accord, lost contact with. So revisiting this is bittersweet for me, and I may have some bias. Let me get it out of the way. The people saying the art style disappointed them are valid, because if it's not your taste, it's not your taste. But the people saying it should have looked more like Spider-Verse animation, please join us all back on Earth. The Spider-Verse films took years to make and is a super innovative style. I don't think it's a good suggestion to say Marvel should copy what Sony is doing. Also, you can't expect them to put the same budget into a TV season among a huge lineup in a franchise that went into a theatrical film. Some people felt that the Infinity Stones working in the space between universes and in other universes was a continuity error. I don't think it is, and I'll explain. The stones not working in the TVA is because the TVA and Citadel at the end of time is a space that exists outside of time. It is separate from the multiverse timelines and spaces between. The complaints that certain episodes didn't work are sorta hit and miss, because everyone is a different scenario with much more of a experimental feel than other Phase 4 and 5 projects, with more of a divide among fans between who liked and disliked what. Shang-Chi. Okay, so this video is me answering all the criticisms and complaints I've seen, because seeing too many is what drove me to this point. And to be honest, I didn't see any for Shang-Chi. and I'm not going to look for any. I'm just going to take the win. One of my favorite Marvel movies, movie, good soup, 10 out of 10, moving on. The Eternals. Lots of people said this movie was boring. I guess. However, I'd describe it as more a tone problem. The longer scenes, particularly the exposition scenes, didn't blend in as well with the action scenes that I felt were done very well. However, I think this movie deserves more slack, considering MCU films exist with much more severe tone problems like Thor 4. I think there were some good, funny moments, like a lot of the dialogue from Kingo's cameraman, the IKEA Fall Collection line, and the kid asking if Icarus is Superman. The visual style of the film is fantastic, with the costumes and powers having the gold, almost line art aesthetic. Lots of people also say there's no reason for them to have existed all this time and not help in the fight against Thanos, but the movie actually does take time to answer that. I do agree with the criticism that the film was trying to introduce too many people at once. However, I think they did a good job with the amount of time they had to tell the story. I do think this is a case where these characters could have benefited from being introduced in a Disney Plus show instead of a film. I do think now that they've all been introduced that the next Eternals project will be more fast-paced. I look forward to seeing them again. Hawkeye. People also call this boring, and I just don't see it. Kate is full of energy, and Clint gets to show off trick arrows that we never saw, with Stark and Pym tech, no less. We find out about Clint's wife being a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, which adds more context to their relationship. ASL representation, a meaningful backstory for Maya, Fisk coming into the MCU. Yelena is awesome and gets closure over Nat's death thanks to Clint. The LARPing scenes were funny. The mustache stepdad is weird in a good way. Lucky the pizza dog is adorable. And we got payoff to the Ronin scene from Endgame. I get that because it takes place during Christmas, some people might find the holiday stuff cheesy. That's fair, but I don't think that's a problem of the show, that's just your personal taste. I also think Hawkeye avoids the anticlimactic finale episode pattern that some of the other shows fell into. I particularly liked that they actually wrote and choreographed a full musical number and showed the full version of it as an end credit scene. I noticed one of the main singers was Ty Taylor from the band Vintage Trouble, who I did see live once years ago. Some people criticized Maya getting her own spin-off series called Echo, which, as of making this video, will be released soon. The conversation about Marvel being quick to greenlight spin-offs is a different conversation. That's not really a criticism of the show Hawkeye itself. Other people said Fisk either wasn't living up to himself from the comics or from the Netflix Daredevil series. I can't answer that, as, like I said, not a comic reader, and I also haven't seen Daredevil. Yes, I know, blasphemy. It's worth noting, though, I also saw criticisms on the other end that Fisk appeared too overpowered in the finale, so I'm not sure which claim is closer to the truth. Spider-Man: No Way Home. Truth be told, my favorite Spider-Man film is Across the Spider-Verse, and my favorite Spider-Man is Hobie Brown. Even without any of the Peters in this movie being my favorite Spider-Man, you can't deny the hype that went into this film. Yes, you can see where it was affected by COVID. Yes, the de-aging for some of the actors doesn't look completely right at times. Yes, I can see how people would view the plot as contrived because Peter going against Doctor Strange to try to cure villains he's never met even with the point May makes to him is a lot. Yes, Doctor Strange not explaining to Peter how the memory wiping spell would work until he started casting it was silly and obviously only there to advance the plot. But I don't care. I don't. This movie is great. The fan service is great. The callbacks are great. MJ sassing Strange about the spell going wrong being his fault is great. Doctor Strange using the phrase, "Scooby-Doo this shit," is great. The redesign for Electro is great. Andrew's Peter getting redemption for Gwen's death by saving MJ is great. Ned being magic, getting a nod of approval from Strange, and being saved by the cape is great. Seeing all three Peters interact is great. Seeing two of the Peters react to one of them having wet fluid in their body is great and weird. I understand people felt, despite how emotional May's death was, that it would have left more of an impact had her relationship with Peter been more well established in the past two films, and I do agree on some level. However, the criticisms that May reciting the "with great power" line takes away from the Uncle Ben character, I have to disagree. Tobey and Andrew's versions of Peter Parker both experienced Uncle Ben's reciting of that line and his death similarly, and from what I've heard, pretty close to the comic events. If they did the same thing with Tom's MCU Peter, it would have been repetitive. I like that they did something different with him. I think May saying that line was the best because she was his only remaining family member. Tony saying it to Peter while he was alive would have been too on the nose since he was like an Uncle Ben / father figure stand-in. I can't remember who said it, but once I was watching a video where someone answered the complaint that MCU Spider-Man didn't have an origin, aka we didn't see him first get bit, learn how to use his powers, etc. Their answer was that MCU Peter's first 3 movies and other appearances is this version of Peter's origin. Learning from Iron Man, the hero he looked up to the most, and finding other versions of himself to look up to, evident by the suit of his we see at the film's end looking more like Tobey and Andrew's. I'm inclined to agree with that explanation. I hope they're setting up for Peter to go from having mentors to being a mentor, particularly by the MCU setting up their version of Miles Morales. I guess we'll find out. Moon Knight. This is one of the most popular shows the MCU put out. I heard very few criticisms for it, and I'm glad because it's one of my favorites. I will say though, since the show deals with representation for the very real mental disorder, DID, and the DID community did have some points about what the show got right and wrong, I want to acknowledge that. Dissociative identity disorder, previously named multiple personality disorder, happens when a child with the ability to dissociate to a high degree experiences severe levels of trauma. The DID community have expressed there were sentiments about the nature of DID and how it works in the show that convey common inaccuracies. Moon Knight conveys the message that Mark Spector was the quote-unquote original personality and Stephen Grant was made up, which also paints Jake Lockley, who we don't see until the end, as also made up by Mark. The explanation for DID that is now widely accepted and considered accurate for the DID community is the theory of structural dissociation. Rather than a child having one personality that splits once DID is formed, it's more like this. As a child is developing, there are different facets of their personality that haven't fused together yet. By the age of 10, typically the fuse happens, aka why DID can't be developed after that. When no trauma and no high levels of dissociation paired with trauma are present in children, their brains will continue to develop normally and the personality will fully fuse. In DID, the trauma and dissociation ends up creating amnesia blocks between different facets of the personality, unable to fuse. And once the brain has learned how to do that, it will continue to put up amnesia walls and create more splits between different facets moving forward as a trauma response. Sometimes, if healing goes a long way, 2 or more personalities in the brain can fuse together when an amnesia wall breaks down. In a normal child, the different facets have no amnesia walls and can communicate seamlessly before the final fuse at around age 10, giving the impression before that age that it was always a single, fully formed personality. An average brain is all of the ingredients being put together into the final result. A DID brain is the ingredients ending up with walls between them never fully forming together. There is no original personality. Mark being framed as the original is an inaccurate depiction. What is accurate about him is that oftentimes there will be a personality, or as they're properly named, alters, in the system who does answer to and uses the birth name assigned to the body that the DID brain resides in. All the alters together in the brain are referred to as a system. The show never refers to Mark and Steven as a system, though that may come in Season 2. Oftentimes, children with DID will think, if I was like this, I could survive or better endure this trauma. Subconsciously, these thoughts are what can create splits after the resulting alter from the split is often named after and exhibits traits of a fictional character who are brave enough or strong enough. These are called fictives. The alter named Stephen Grant is a fictive, and many DID systems have backed the show on an accurate portrayal of a fictive alter. Something that Marvel got horribly wrong, though, is the depiction of alter roles. Mark was aware of the abuse and Steven was not. In the scene that depicts one of the first times, if not the first time Steven fronts in the body, it's just before the mom enters the bedroom and begins physically harming the body. Steven is a protective alter in the sense of being able to give the body a break from high stress levels due to his unawareness of the abuse. So him fronting just before an episode of physical abuse doesn't make sense. The only theory I have as to why the scene was structured that way might be for a later reveal. We know barely anything about Jake Lockley, and some DID systems have spoken about not being fond of Jake's portrayal as extremely violent, considering the overly violent DID depictions there are in media already, such as the movie Split. I do think Marvel can pay off this criticism by giving Jake a backstory that explains his particularly extra-violent nature in comparison to Mark and Steven. I think in Season 2 we will get a reveal that Steven wasn't aware at all, Mark knew about the verbal and physical abuse but was only present for the verbal abuse, but it was in fact Jake who took the physical beatings. That he is supposed to serve as a protective alter who is mentally stoic enough to withstand the beatings for the other two, but as a result turned him down a dark path. It can be revealed in that one flashback after Steven fronted and we no longer saw what happened, only heard the mother beating them, that it was Jake who fronted immediately after to endure the pain. I think this way Marvel can somewhat avoid the dangerous alter in a system stereotype by having Steven and Mark come to an understanding with Jake the way they did with each other in the first season. Criticisms about an anticlimactic finale were thrown at Moon Knight. I have to say, anticlimactic I don't agree with. Rushed, I do agree with. I definitely think the finale could have and should have been longer. I also don't think the claims at the finale being boiled down to another pew-pew superhero fight are all that fair. Amit is ultimately defeated not with violence or any physical force, but with an ancient incantation. We also don't have the individual fight with Harrow solved with on-screen violence. We do get some of Mark and Steven showing how well they switch and use their skills together now, along with Layla showing off the abilities of her new suit. However, if you recall, the fight is cut short by Steven and Mark both blacking out, while the mysterious third altar that's been alluded to the entire show fronts, and we don't get to see that part of the fight. It leaves us with speculation instead of watching the system punch their way out of it. When it comes to Layla, some people had a problem with her name being changed from the comics. Once again, I don't think Marvel is obligated to stay true to the comics with every detail. I take issue with criticisms from the line of Layla's where, when asked if she is an Egyptian superhero, answers, "I am." Now, I can see why people say the line was rushed and that she could have thought about it a little bit more before answering, because her answer also serves to sway her decision to stay being Teweret's avatar. But, in context of the scene, she's in the middle of a fight and doesn't have time to stand there and think. Layla and her actress both are Egyptian, and so is the little girl who asks her if she's a superhero. If you saw a little girl from your country asking if you are a hero when currently there are none and have been no superheroes from your homeland, you probably would feel inclined to say yes, to want to give representation to someone who didn't have it in this form before. In real life, Layla as the Scarlet Scarab is the first mainstream media on-screen Egyptian superhero. She's both real and in-universe representation. Honestly, she's probably one of my favorite MCU characters, and I really hope that we get to see more of her as the Scarlet Scarab in Season 2. Multiverse of Madness. I know a lot of people compared this movie to Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I can't speak to which was a better multiverse movie because I only saw this one. Yes, I know, blasphemy. There's the criticism that this movie doesn't go to that many other universes. Set aside the handful we see America and Strange tumble through till they get to the Illuminati universe. I want to make the argument that the movie is about the madness, or to put it another way, chaos, that comes from opening up the multiverse. It's a pretty good progression when you consider, lastly, Strange saw people from other universes showing up in Spider-Man No Way Home, but now he's the one traveling to other universes. Aside from our universe, we see the Illuminati universe and a deteriorating universe similar to the one from episode 4 of What If Season 1. The Book of Ashanti seems to exist in a space outside the multiverse, so I won't count that. Other universe appearances, aside from the handful in the montage heavily featured in the trailers, we see the Defenders Strange that later becomes Zombie Strange, and we see a flashback to America as a child in whatever universe she came from. I get that that isn't a huge number of universes, but given the story the film is telling, adding even more could have felt rushed or out of place. I think Doctor Strange's character development in this film is done pretty well. His lesson from Peter in No Way Home, that someone else's judgment might not be worse than yours, even if the spell he did for Peter might have erased some of that, does shine through. The dialogue where he says, "Trust your power to America," is cheesy, I agree, but his development really shows here, believing in someone else more than himself. I would rather his dialogue have been more along the lines of, "Your power hasn't worked when you wanted, but it worked when you needed. Your power transported you whenever you were afraid to get to safety. You need to trust your power will work when it has to." That being said, the lines we got instead, albeit cheesy, were very Sam Raimi, so I can still appreciate it. From what I've heard from other fans, I do agree Marvel should have just kept the main universe having the number 19999 instead of giving it the same number as the main comic universe, since apparently the events of the main comic universe and the MCU vary quite a lot. I also commend this movie for taking the violence to a level we haven't seen yet in the MCU. Say what you will about Phase 4 and 5, you can't deny the experimental aspects and how they really tried to push outside the lines. With regards to the Illuminati's death, I've seen it criticized that the two dudes die first. Somehow this is apparently a part of the MCU agenda, which is not one of the criticisms I find all that valid, as I've said, but it irked me enough in this particular instance to debunk, so here goes. Reed is the first to challenge Wanda by telling her about Black Bolt's power. Black Bolt doesn't die because he's weaker than the others, he dies because he's blindsided after having his power revealed, so Wanda has the upper hand. Reed dies right after because he's landed closest in proximity to Wanda, and when he landed, his stretching powers were very visible, so Wanda knew how to deal with him. Peggy and Maria last a bit longer because, unlike Bolt and Reed, they are actively strategizing together, but even still, there's no match for Wanda. Narratively, those two lasting longer in the fight makes more sense. Wanda knew Steve, and he spoke for her, so she would also know who Peggy is. She knows Monica Rambeau and has been inside SWORD headquarters, so she knows Maria. She's close to people from her universe who knows these people, and if there's a version of Steve or Monica around in this universe, she's just taken this Peggy and Maria from them. There's a small look of almost guilt from her after she kills them, to serve as showing it's going to take a lot more emotion to fully pull her out from the Darkhold's grasp. Seeing her children afraid of her later is what finally does it. Wanda has no connection or knowledge of Reed or Black Bolt whatsoever, so it makes sense for the deaths she would actually feel some way about to happen after Reed and Black Bolt. Speaking of Witch Mother, no, I don't like the decisions made for her character in this movie. However, the way people have largely interpreted Wanda in this film, similar to WandaVision, does not sit right with me. Saying Wanda is the villain ignores crucial context. As I said in my portion about WandaVision, she took the Darkhold to learn more about herself in an attempt to stop something like the Westview Hex from happening again. She did not know the Darkhold corrupts the user. The Darkhold in the WandaVision post-credit scene and most of Multiverse of Madness is taking advantage of Wanda's grief over the loss of her kids. She experienced her grief and denial clouding her ability to think clearly in WandaVision, and while trying to avoid that again, experiences an evil book taking away her agency/autonomy. Her choices are not entirely her own in this film. I don't see a villain. I see an evil book-possessed, traumatized woman who has barely ever known peace despite the amount of power she wields. My love for Wanda aside, it doesn't mean that I refuse to accept her as a villain. It just means I will not accept a villain arc unless it's a real one, which this is not. Wanda has shown when she is of sound mind and knows the truth of a situation, she will do the right thing. If she was fully aware, not under any sort of influence, and still insisted the ends justify the means, that would have been a real villain arc. But what they did with her here is makes it easy writing. Wanda destroyed the Darkhold in every universe, therefore preventing thousands, even millions of deaths that could have been caused by whoever could get their hands on it in each universe, therefore saving more lives than she took. There doesn't even need to be a redemption arc because Strange is aware of her sacrifice and can vouch for her when it turns out later on she didn't actually die. It feels like Marvel knows the fan base Wanda has and felt they couldn't go full villain with her, but tried to halfway it with the Darkhold corruption so they could still push the scary witch visuals. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too, which I didn't care for. I don't think the film is completely terrible, but that decision felt wrong. That's something else I want to touch on. Though the MCU claims aren't really something I'm debunking too much in this video due to the shaky foundations of it, I think there's a point to be made here. The feminist community condemns the women going mad with power trope, which is a version of what we got with Wanda here. She's arguably the most powerful being in the main universe, and despite that power, couldn't escape a book taking advantage of her and having her agency and choices messed with. That's not an empowering storyline. If Marvel's attempts to tell progressive stories were really coming from a place of pandering rather than being genuine, I find it almost impossible to believe they would have still made the decisions with Wanda that they did here. With Wanda being as strong as she is, it feels less believable that the book could truly get to her if the other versions of her kids were happy and safe. That's why I think the film lost an opportunity not following through with the WandaVision post-credit scene where she hears the twins calling for help. Believing her kids are in danger would have made more sense that the Darkhold could manipulate her as much as it did. It could have also made for a nice payoff if the exact cries for help she hears from them in that post-credit scene are the same cries from the twins that they let out after she throws their Wanda across the stairs towards the end of the film when she tries to kidnap them. And now we move on to one of my favorites, Miss Marvel. Okay, so complaints of wokeness and forced diversity aside, I've seen criticisms that seem to be from a more genuine place when it comes to the show. Number one being it falls into the rushed finale episode and underdeveloped dialogue problem. I don't disagree. When Kamala is talking to Kamran's mother before she dies, her decision to sacrifice herself to close the portal happens a bit too quickly. How Kamran's mother sends him powers could use more explaining, and Kamala's conversation with Kamran in the last episode could have used more revising. That being said, I love the show other than that. Plus, I also think Marvel's idea to have Kamala be a mutant like originally intended in the comics instead of an inhuman like she ended up being is a good call. I like that they used a music cue to reveal that. The visual style, especially in the first episode, is really creative, including how text messages are shown on screen. The illustrations showing Kamala's daydreams felt like such personal representation for neurodivergent, specifically ADHD people, including myself. My daydreaming was not just vibrant as hers is when I was her age, but even to this day. Some people have gone on to say they weren't interested in this show because it's a quote-unquote kid show, and I don't want to tell anyone that they're flat out wrong for feeling that way, but I would like to point out I Am Groot is what a Marvel's kid show looks like. Miss Marvel is more for people in middle school or high school, but younger kids and adults can enjoy it too. I also think there are scenes that would have played out differently if the show really was trying to go for a kids-only angle. At the AvengerCon scene, when the Mjolnir replica slams into Kamala's school rival, the camera makes it look almost as if she dies on impact until you see a couple seconds later she's fine, albeit holding on for dear life. The little kid Kamala saves outside the mosque ends up breaking his ankle rather than coming out of the situation completely unscathed. When Kamala goes back in time and ends up reuniting her grandma with her great-grandfather, her great-grandma Aisha still dies. Fully dies. From being stabbed, no less. If they were going for the kid-only angle, I think it probably would have been a Back to the Future scenario where Kamala would save her and alter the way things happened. When the GOTG hunting Kamala and then also Kamran down are storming the school, they punch Bruno to the ground, which is not a level of brutality that I think a kids-only show would feel comfortable displaying. I think the show does a good job of showing a realistic look at bigotry as well. The investigations lady working for the GOTG is clearly racist, but her boss and the GOTG itself is not. She abuses her power for her own agenda and gets fired for it. I find it especially funny for this show to be seen as pushing a left agenda when it's shown to the audience that the regular police officers stand with Kamala and her community against the GOTG. Although the show does wrap up a bit too easily, I like that they leave us with some mystery. How does Kamala connect to any of the other mutants? Where is the second bangle? Why were at least I think it was the 10 rings depicted in the temple that the bangle came from? How did Kamala and Carol switch places in that end credit scene? I also like how they still included her ability to use giant limbs from the comics while combining it with the powers they wanted to establish her having in the MCU. I particularly like the visuals for her hard light, especially in the scene where she's practicing her power. Lastly, I want to say I think the show did a good job of avoiding the teen love triangles the way they usually play out. Typically, it's two guys with feelings for a girl, and the girl has feelings for both of them. With Kamala, she likes Kamran, yes, but sees Bruno as her best friend and doesn't know about his feelings because he doesn't tell her. He shows a bit of jealousy, but when he catches Kamala and Kamran almost kissing, he continues to help them. And Kamala doesn't end up with either of them by the end, as they both move away from where she lives. It's a more realistic look at how a love triangle can turn out for someone their age. Okay, we're here. Thor, Love and Thunder. Yes, this movie has a tone problem. Yes, some of the jokes didn't land. Yes, they were arguably trying to do too much with the amount of time they had to tell the story. Yes, there were scenes filmed and cut that may have been helpful to the story to keep included. Those criticisms I agree with. However, in the age of social media that we're living in now, the best scenes of films and shows are almost always uploaded in some form to YouTube or wherever else. I'm of the mind that if I watch something and it has tone problems, but there were things I really liked, I'm still glad I watched it, so I have those really good scenes to rewatch individually. I think a lot of people miss out by not considering that. If a film doesn't have much rewatchability due to tone problems, poorly executed scenes, or maybe even just an extremely long runtime, it's fine to just rewatch the parts you liked and disregard the rest while being glad the film exists to give you the parts you did like. Here's what I did like about this movie. Mjolnir and Stormbreaker having personalities was super fun. Thor's request to Mjolnir in the flashback to always protect Jane, and that being the foundation for Lady Thor existing, is a really great choice. Jane's mother also having died of cancer adds a layer to her pain that I think helps us feel for her even more. Jane denying how bad her stage 4 is and trying to science her way out of it is very in character, and not being able to resist helping Thor even though she'll die is a perfect character-driven decision. I like how the hammer comes apart in pieces and forms back together when she wields it. Despite that we don't see much of the Guardians, I do appreciate the character development we get to see from Quill and how much he values his crew when he's giving Thor advice. Also, Thor riding Stormbreaker like a witch's broom is hilarious. I don't care what you say. I like how full of himself Zeus is and how he shows off Lightning Bolt. I think it's interesting how the scene fighting Zeus's guards is actually one of the most brutal MCU scenes we've gotten since they bleed gold in order to pass as PG-13. Like, when Thor is walking barefoot on the ship, leaving gold footprints behind, just imagine red and you'll realize how bloody it actually got. I love all the different designs for the different deities we get to see at that big gathering where we meet Zeus, and Valkyrie actually being a little gay on camera instead of the off-screen confirmation of being bi that we got for her in Ragnarok. There is something I took some issue with though, and that's how Korg gets saved. His face being fine and regrowing his whole body after is okay, I guess, but here's what I would have liked to have seen instead. Jane looks around at the pieces of Korg while Thor is devastated. Jane's eyes then flicker to the hammer, seeing all the pieces bound together. She then announces she's going to try something and uses the power of the hammer to reform Korg the way Mjolnir has been shown to reform itself earlier in the movie. This can also work to foreshadow Gorr using Mjolnir to reform the sword later in the film. Once Korg is fine, Jane turns to Thor with a big smile and repeats his own line from Avengers Endgame saying, "I had no idea that was going to work." I had a theory before this film came out that I shared with a friend who liked it about Love and Thunder connecting to Wakanda Forever, so I'll share it here. I speculated one of the ways we might see the power and intimidation of Gorr is him sending some disaster to Wakanda that kills T'Challa in order to get a rise out of Bast, the Panther goddess. Since Moon Knight established the gods having avatars, and Bast being Khonshu's sister, I thought she might have more screen time in this film, as she actually did, and that we would get confirmation the Black Panther is her avatar. I thought T'Challa being killed would be a great way to rally Bast against Gorr by helping Thor in some sort of way. I now know after seeing both of those films that it couldn't have worked with the way the stories were being told, but I still think that it was a cool idea. Yes, the joke about Korg having two dads does make for a continuity error with one of the best jokes we got from Ragnarok, but instead of immediately jumping to assuming Taika is pushing an agenda, like some people said, I just chalk it up to he forgot the original joke. I do think Korg having that mustache boyfriend at the end was funny. Also, Sif losing her arm did feel silly, but I think a cool moment can be set up with this detail. Imagine in the next Avengers film, Sif and Bucky run into each other, look at their fake limbs, and say, "Nice arm." I think all the scenes with Gorr were as creepy as they were meant to be, except the sympathetic scenes in the beginning and end. For all the movie's faults, I found it worth watching for how beautiful Jane's death scene was, paired with Gorr's last decision to make a wish out of love instead of out of hate, to bring back his daughter instead of killing all gods. I like Thor's promise to take care of love, and becoming a dad figure allows him to continue to grow and grieve Jane without being alone. I do also think the post-credit scene with Hercules is interesting, and I hope they pay it off so we can see where that's supposed to go. Next up is I Am Groot. Okay, so I'm including season 1 and 2 together because they're both so short and are comprised of shorts without really any narrative implications to each other or the grander MCU. I've seen a lot of people being pessimistic and saying Marvel shouldn't have extended their special effects budget that was already arguably being spread thin to these shorts because it's made for little kids. While I think 2D animation, like the What If style, could have worked for this, I do appreciate the extra effort put in. There's poop and fart jokes, so what? That's what 6-year-olds find funny, and who cares if the older audience members who watched it also found those jokes funny? It's a really weird thing to be that hung up about. If you're really annoyed with people enjoying this, honestly, maybe just chill. It's not that deep. I think these shorts are a good idea because there should be something for all ages of Marvel fans, since little kids with parents who are fans won't be able to keep up with all new projects due to the content shown in some projects. I think it's smart with the shorts runtime of these episodes for Groot to do his little fourth wall breaking fast forward of the typical Marvel opening sequence. I particularly liked that we got to see a little bit of Rocket acting as a father figure in season 1, and the cameo from the Watcher in season 2, especially since What If had so many episode endings that were on the sad side of things. It's nice to see the Watcher commenting on something lighthearted. And here we go for a quick intermission. This is not a sponsor. My channel does not have sponsors yet. I just wanted to take a tiny break to tell you that my channel is a variety channel. I do some fandom videos here and there, but that's not what my channel is dedicated to. Anyone who is considering subscribing based on this video, I ask that you take a look at the content posted on my channel and see if it is of interest to you overall. I also ask for anyone who's willing to help support the videos of mine that aren't doing as well in the algorithm, because the videos that aren't doing the best are the types that I'm interested in doing regularly, which is kind of a problem. Currently, the videos that are and will be the most recurring are the clothing projects and my reaction/commentaries to colorized vintage footage and silent films. Some of my clothing projects that I want to make moving forward are fandom-based, some Marvel and Doctor Who stuff, so if you want to help me make that happen, please support me. I'm not asking for a subscribe, like, or comment, just asking to give my other videos a chance. I also wanted to show the concept design for a Marvel project that I didn't have the time or budget for. The digital coloring took, I think, like an hour, and I didn't want it to go to waste. The dress is based on the neon variant of Captain Marvel's suit from her first movie. I had hoped to make this a little bit before the Marvels came out, but as I said, I didn't end up doing that. Since Carol is in her 20s in the 90s in the first film, and therefore she would be 18 in the 1980s, the dress was supposed to look a bit like an 80s school dance dress, shoulder pads included. I still might make this in the future, who knows. Okay, back to the video. She-Hulk. Here we go. Is this one of my favorite projects? No. But do I think it's overhated? Yes. The weird thing is, although past projects did get a lot of man-hating and feminist agenda comments and allegations from men, this project was one where a lot of those comments were being brought up by women as well, and I just don't see it. Because of how prevalent those comments are, let's just settle it here. Of the male characters who are named that we see who are good to Jen, we have Bruce, Wong, Emil, Pug, Daredevil, the 4 guys Jen speaks to at the retreat, her dad, the designer Luke Jacobson, even though he was mad at her for a bit. Of the guys we see who are neutral, as in unhelpful but not evil, or unkind but not at an evil level, we have her cousin, her ex-boss, her new boss, Donnie Blaze, Leapfrog, a couple of other firm clients, some of the dating app guys, and of the straight-up evil guys who are actively named, we have the leader of Intelligentsia, Todd Phelps, and others of his group members, including the guy that slept with Jen to get her blood. The good guys and neutral guys outweigh the evil guys in the show by far. There's even one scene where Pug has to be directed on how to act like a douche because he's so wholesome, he really doesn't know how. The show could have gone a still a villain route for Emil, but actually made him into a eccentric and weird, albeit pretty nice guy. The show also features evil, or at least not good, female characters like Titania and the Asgardian shapeshifter. When it comes to the complaints that the show seems to be suggesting Jen is stronger than Bruce, I think that's due to not considering all the context. When Bruce mentions synthesizing her blood to heal his arm and she teases him about being better than him, it's exactly that, teasing. They're shown to be cousins that have a very sibling dynamic, and that's how Jen delivers the line. Bruce in Hulk form is stronger than Jen. The show directly tells us that by him going easy while training her till she shows off, and then he shows off even more. Jen can't create a single wind clap as strong as Bruce and has to improvise. Jen may not have an alter ego to wrestle with, but she also isn't a scientist with the capabilities of building things to aid her the way Bruce is, and through her fourth wall breaking, it's shown that it can distract her almost like how maladaptive daydreaming does, and she misses things that she couldn't pay attention to while talking to the audience, something that could become a hindrance for her later on. Some people complained Jen was too harsh on Bruce when she called him out for insisting she has anger problems, shows she's annoyed, turns into She-Hulk and back to normal on purpose to show she has a handle on it. But I think what she says to him is fair. Bruce is actively showing jealousy that she doesn't have to worry about the things that affected him for years and left him with arguably not completely resolved trauma. As a woman, a lot of what Jen describes about women needing to learn from a young age to control their anger because of everyday life is, unfortunately, incredibly accurate. She doesn't even mention things like most girls experiencing being catcalled when they're middle school and high school age and almost always being told that's just how life is, instead of anyone with authority wanting to help create change in a meaningful way. To me, Jen had every reason to be annoyed with and lecture Bruce here. He needed to accept that she didn't need to face the long journey that he did, and it's okay that he struggled with things that she doesn't. Some parts of the show did feel rushed, and the finale did feel wrapped up a bit too quickly, but I'd like to point out Marvel doesn't do nothing when they hear legitimate complaints. They knew some fans didn't care for a lot of the shows and movies ending in a super brawl, so they avoided it with She-Hulk. They took her fourth wall breaking ability to a level I don't think many people were expecting, which was cool to see, and also got her to speak on behalf of the audience in asking about stuff like the X-Men, showing that they do in fact hear what people are saying. You can't say Marvel wasn't trying to answer some of the past criticisms here. Whether or not they succeeded is, of course, up to you. I have a little bias towards the finale because of the little montage mimicking the Hulk show from the 70s. It really tugged on the strings of my vintage heart. Speaking of, Werewolf by Night. This is another one like Shang-Chi where it was so well received I saw pretty much no criticisms, except for one. I'm going to take the wind here and just answer this one problem people had, which is most of it being in black and white. It perfectly replicated that classic monster movie feel, so if you found the black and white distracting or less engaging, that's fine, but as I said with WandaVision, that's not a fair criticism of the project itself, as you'd have to extend that criticism to the types of films that it replicated perfectly. However, in case you didn't know, Marvel has released a fully colorized version, so you can now enjoy it if that was the only thing holding you back. Wakanda Forever. This movie was very well received with few problems, however, here are some. Firstly, people thought the underwater scenes could have looked better, comparing it to Avatar: The Way of Water. Guys, I really don't think it's fair to compare this film to one that was 13 years in the making and invented its own underwater form of motion capture. Some people commented the fictional death of Ramonda, played by Angela Bassett, downplays the very real death of Chadwick Boseman, who the film is very much a tribute to. However, I don't think that's true. The beginning and end of the movie takes time to remember him well. Ramonda's death also narratively makes sense and helps give context to Shuri's decisions. There were comments about the way Riri talks and calling it stereotypical, but to be honest, I had no problem with her dialogue and thought she was funny at times. I guess it makes sense that she leaned into the AAVE to help the audience hear the cultural differences between her and the Wakandans, which is also why I liked how Shuri created her AI. Him not having a Wakandan accent means she'll differentiate whether it's him or someone else talking to her in the lab, and I like that detail. The stuff with Valentina and the secret agent guy, whose name escapes me, did feel a bit tacked on, like some people said. However, I think it still fit with the subplots enough that I don't actually find it that big of a deal. Yes, the suits Riri and Okoye wore are ugly. I agree. But with Riri's suit, though, I think it's just supposed to look that way because it's Mark 1, and we'll see improvements to it the way Tony's suits continue to improve, till we see her make one more comic accurate. Something I would like to have seen is the inclusion of Bucky, even if not directly. After everything the Wakandans and Shuri did for him, it would have been nice to see on Shuri's phone a text from Bucky asking "How are you holding up?" or some small indication that they're still friends and keeping up with each other. I liked everything about how they presented Namor, and although some people said that it was too similar to the plot of the first Black Panther film, I'd argue it's not because there's no family dynamic involved with this villain. Speaking of, T'Challa having a son named after him is the perfect choice in my opinion. I know some people agreed with Marvel that recasting would be disrespectful and others disagreed. This is a way not to recast while also not giving up the character altogether. When Secret Wars comes out and some soft rebooting happens, they could age up T'Challa Jr. so that we can have some Black Panther storylines told with him. I think it's the perfect solution. And here we move on to the end of Phase 4 with the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. There were little complaints about this special other than it being too cheesy and Mantis being too shouty. However, I think it shows development that she's sticking up for herself more. The special was the perfect way to introduce Cosmo properly because of how much would be going on in Guardians 3. I get that the songs and some of the lines about Christmas time were super Hallmark level cheese, but it's for the holidays, so I'm not really sure what else you'd expect. The revelation that Mantis is Quill's sister is also really nice, since all she said in the second Guardians film was that Ego raised her as his own, but not that she was his own. It wasn't that big a jump in logic to buy, and adds another dynamic to the Guardians that I like. Drax was super funny as always, and we finally get to see adult Groot again, different than the first film of course, since he's regrown. Nebula giving Rocket Bucky's arm might be my favorite moment other than everything with Cosmo. Next up, Quantumania. So I'll admit here I am biased to this film for a specific reason, as if WandaVision being a replica of old sitcoms, and the 70s Hulk spoof in She-Hulk plus Werewolf by Night weren't enough. This film begins and ends with the song Welcome Back from the sitcom Welcome Back, Kotter, my favorite sitcom ever. I heard the song begin to play and almost cried. My strings were tugged in such a personal way that I said, movie, you can do whatever you want now. Jokes that didn't land, don't know her, never heard of her. Speaking of the jokes, yeah, I get it, a lot of it didn't work. This CGI for MODOK looks weird at times, or most of the time, and MODOK's lines towards the end are a bit weird, but also when he talks about not being a dick, he's quoting Cassie, a teenager, and don't be a dick is absolutely a thing a teenager would say. I don't think the criticisms of the film are unreasonable overall, but similar to my sentiments about Love and Thunder, I believe you can enjoy parts of something and be glad you saw them without wanting to rewatch the entire thing. So here's what I liked. The scenes with the mind reader were fun and showed how difficult and uncomfortable it would be to have that power. That one goo-looking character being obsessed with holes and getting his own holes when he gets shot at later was a joke I personally found funny. I liked the line where the quantum people get asked if they live in buildings that are alive and respond back with horror, "Yours are dead." I think Hank and Janet being able to accept that they saw other people briefly while they were separated, it just felt very mature, unlike a lot of situations where a film might use this point to create tension and or an argument. Scott's relationship with Cassie is great. The new actress for Cassie is fun and energetic. This Kang variant was super intimidating, especially when asked by Janet once he'll do what he leaves on his ship, simply saying, "I'll win." It is a bit anticlimactic how this Kang is beaten by the end, but all the different Kang variants are really cool that we get to see at the post-credit scene of the Kang rave, or cave, as my friend once put it. There are a lot of things that didn't work, and a lot of weird, poorly done visuals in this movie, but there are also some great moments and really great visuals, so I don't think it's fair to trash the film entirely. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Another 10 out of 10, I'm gonna take the win on this one. Except for one small criticism I've seen, that people say the movie tries to balance too much. I think everything was balanced perfectly, although for the people who are concerned because Adam Warlock isn't like he apparently is in the comics, you gotta remember he's newly hatched from his cradle, young and learning in this film, so there's plenty of room for him to grow in the future. Secret Invasion. Yes, there are scenes that scream rewrites and reshoots. Yes, some reveals are anticlimactic. Yes, the CGI in the finale looks laughable in quite a few shots. However, I don't share the opinion that a lot of people do that this show is trash. I have some problems with some of the decisions made, but there were also things I really liked. Fury's wife and their story I absolutely loved. The callback to the poem she likes when her and Fury aim and shoot past each other instead of killing each other is one of my favorite scenes, and one of the best done scenes in the Marvel Disney Plus shows. You can't tell me otherwise. And yeah, maybe I'm a bit biased because I love monster love stories like The Shape of Water, and a romance involving an alien humanoid is right up the alley of a romance I can get behind, so every scene of these two I just love. Vara's speech to Gaia about wanting to die in her home surrounded by her happiness instead of being chased down an alley makes so much sense and speaks to how secure she is and how she feels about who she is. The character played by Olivia Colman was really likable to me. The writing definitely didn't make her feel as necessary to the story as she should have felt, but I enjoyed a lot of her lines, like, "I'm good at being your bestie and also very good at not being your bestie," and putting an eye patch on the owl that Fury snuck a hidden cam onto. I really like Gaia avenging her parents' death, and I like the idea of her being a super Skrull. The way it happened was a bit sloppy, yes, but she's played by Emilia Clarke, who has a huge fan base. Gaia as a character can end up being a great addition to the MCU as long as she's written well in future projects. She's basically Combo Woman, a version of Combo Man from the comics, as Nando V Movies said on his channel. And I think a character with a combination of different superpowers can be done well. Her character should definitely return, and I'll speak on how later in the video. As for this show's faults, similar to the criticisms about elements where projects were affected by COVID, this is something similar. Secret Invasion had to go through massive rewrites and reshoots due to the war between Russia and Ukraine. With the amount of money already spent on the project, Marvel couldn't spend very much more for what had to be redone. So although I don't think it's fair to say the failings of Secret Invasion is entirely Marvel's fault, I also think if the show fell flat for you, that's understandable. As I said, I liked some parts. Loki Season 2. 10 out of 10. Everyone's been giving it good reviews. I'll take the win on this one. Although, I will say, I thought there would be a bit more payoff to the love story established between Loki and Sylvie in Season 1, or at least a conversation about how she pushed him through a tempad door after he bore his feelings completely out to her and they kissed, but I can look past the lack of conclusion to that. The Marvels. I loved it. 10 out of 10. For me, anyway. This is actually the first Marvel movie that I went to see in theaters, and I gotta say, worth every dollar I paid. The criticisms that are coming from a genuinely constructive place for this film are about mostly the villain and the runtime. I do agree the villain doesn't have a fleshed out backstory, but I also don't think every villain needs to have one. I do agree the runtime could have been longer, but I also know it's shorter because one of the music scenes was cut out, which I think was a good call because some people really didn't like the musical scene that was kept in. The dynamic between Monica, Carol, and Kamala in this film is amazing. The choreography for the fight scenes when the three are switching places is done so well. Kamala's fangirl moments are adorable, and her recruiting Kate to what will be the Young Avengers is awesome. The song from the musical Cats playing when all the Flurkin kitties are eating people to get them off the station was hilarious. And the people that are mad about that, honestly, just chill, live a little. The dialogue from Kamala's family is great, especially when her brother is praying and Fury tells him, "Don't stop, we need all the help we can get." Carol feels less stoic also and more open in this film, which I loved. Monica starts to get closure for her mom's passing, and Kamala gets to meet her idol and also find out where the second bangle is. I love all the lines where Kamala is trying to workshop a hero name for Monica. Speaking of Monica, I think there was something missing in this film. I think her and Carol could have opened up more easily about Maria's death if there was a scene in which Monica is informed about Wanda's supposed death. She could get emotional, and Carol could ask her what's wrong. We could get Monica explaining how she helped Wanda give birth, watch her lose the twins and be reminded of her own mom, that Wanda being dead makes everything she's been dealing with about Maria's passing even worse. I think it would have helped break their barrier as opposed to the mind melding they do with the Skrull tech, I think, or Kree tech, although I do think that scene still worked fine. I also think it needed more explaining that because the hexagon reality pieces were stretching outwards, that's why Monica had to close it from the inside. Easier to push than pull. Her getting stuck in another universe might not have felt as contrived if there was a line explaining that, but at least that brought us to the post-credit scene. I love seeing Maria Rambeau as binary and seeing Beast. The CGI for him looks pretty great. When it comes to Carol in the MCU's future before the next Avengers film, here's what I think we should see. Yes, she should continue to stay in contact with Kamala, but I also think she should meet and help Gaia. Carol promised to help the Skrulls, and now some survivors are in New Asgard. While checking up on them, Carol can run into Gaia and realize not one, but both of the little girls she knew around the time she became Captain Marvel got powers. Even though she can't help and guide Monica, she can help Gaia. So she does, especially since Carol's powers are the ones that Gaia seems to favor using. And now to the conclusion. All in all, the criticisms of Marvel's Phase 4 and 5 aren't without some merits, but the growing number of video essays leaning towards an overly negative side, plus the flooding of Marvel's social media comments with straight-up toxic behavior, makes it currently frustrating to be a diehard fan. Don't get me wrong, constructive criticism is great, like I said, but so much of what I've seen hasn't been all that constructive. I do think there are things that can be improved, and I want to see improvements, but not at the cost of projects I'm excited for or at least curious about getting cancelled or pushed back to a ridiculously faraway date. I understand some of the delays were due to the writers and actors strike, which I fully support, but we all know that isn't the only reason. The constant complaints at Marvel is another reason, and I hate it. Thanks, I hate it. I don't want to shift the blame onto any individual person, as I said before, but the crowd being overly negative to the point of saying blank sucks or blank will flop are the same crowd constantly commenting XYZ should be cancelled. It feels like they want the diehard fans excited for upcoming projects to be punished for their own personal dissatisfaction, being as loud as they can to drown out those being more constructive and/or positive. It's like the one kid acting up getting the whole class in trouble. Moving forward, I think something I'd like to see is Marvel using their special presentations not just for holidays. I'd like to be introduced to new characters not popular enough to get their own shows or movies to perhaps be given specials so that audiences can see the runtime and say, oh, it won't take too much time to give it a try. Werewolf by Night proved that you can introduce multiple characters in less time than the films usually allow for. Some of the shows that were greenlit that haven't begun filming yet could be made into specials instead, so people who want the projects can still get them, and people who don't care for it can relax about less budget going to those projects. It's a nice compromise that I'd like to see, but we'll have to see if Marvel decides to do something like that. Personally, I don't think fully rebooting the MCU after Secret Wars and canceling a bunch of projects is the right way to go. Rewrites and reshoots, sure. Pushing a project back, as long as it's not pushed back to an unreasonable amount of time, sure. I really don't buy the Marvel is dying claim when Deadpool 3 is coming out soon and we know people love Deadpool and Wolverine. And as I've heard a lot of other people say who are on my side of things, when the next Avengers film releases, everyone will come out of the woodworks to buy a ticket. As for fans who are in the same place as me, frustrated with the negativity but still enjoying Marvel, I hope that you found this video to be the positive beacon I'm hoping it will be. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.